Ladies and gentlemen, actually good evening to the audiences who are watching from Indian subcontinent, and good morning to the audiences who are watching from American and Latin American countries. So good evening, good morning, and good afternoon to all of you who are watching, and a warm welcome to two-day Saudha International Satyajit Congress. As you know, some of you perhaps are well aware of Saudha's art initiative, that is a UK-based art organization, one of the leading South Asian music, South Asian art, literature, and music promoters here in the UK. Mainly, Saudha delves into the promotion of Indian classical music. We managed to fuse Indian classical music with many other world classical music, and that includes Western classical. Some of the Saudha's classical concerts were extremely and widely accepted by musicologists and audiences all from all over the world. And that includes what he did in relation to Indian ragas, and one with Sebastian Bach's the Goldberg variation, for an example. So many thanks to all of you who have been following Saudha's art initiatives for the last 10 years. And this is a pleasure now to host this beautiful session of cinema through celebration of an iconic filmmaker, uh, an iconic neorealist filmmaker from India, Satyajit Ray. Let me perhaps introduce some of our guest speakers who have already joined and who will be joining in different phases today. Saudha is extremely glad to be able to collaborate with some wonderful organizations that include Queen Mary University in London, Nehru Center in London, and Chok Film Society of Shah Jalan University in Bangladesh, and the Grunthi South Asian Literary Platform here in the UK, and Radhadaman Society. So ladies and gentlemen, those who are watching, if you kindly share this to your timeline, let me perhaps share to my timeline so that you can share from mine in many extents. So that's great. I have shared, and let me now introduce our guest today. So we have Bhaskar Chattopadhyay, who joined from India, a Satyajit researcher, a writer, author, and columnist, and a translator as well. Many thanks, Bhaskar Chattopadhyay, for joining as part of today's Congress, Satyajit Ray Congress, and a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We also have an academic researcher from India, the professor of Jadavpur University, Shumit Rai. Many thanks, Shumitra, for joining as part of today's Congress, and a warm welcome. We have Akram Hussain, the General Secretary of Chok Film Society of Shah Jalan University in Bangladesh. Many thanks, Akram, for joining, and a warm welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Saudha Society and Poetry and Indian Music, and especially Kaisar Bhai for collaborating with Chokpan Society. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Akram. And we have Professor Sanjoy Mukhopadhyay, a founding professor of film study in Jadavpur University, a leading academic, a leading filmologist in India at this moment. Many thanks, Sanjada, for joining as part of today's Congress, and a warm welcome. Unfortunately, you were muted, Sanjada. If you kindly unmute yourself, that would be great. We have Ashwin Devasundaram, a senior lecturer of linguistics and film studies of Queen Mary University in London. Many thanks, Ashwin, for joining, and a warm welcome.
Many thanks for inviting me, Ahmed.
Thank you. And we have Ruxana Tabassum, a film director, a young film director, and an actor as well. Thank you, Ruxana, for joining. And warm welcome to the Congress.
Thank you so much. So glad to be a part of this.
Thank you. And we have Gulrukh Khan, another an award-winning film director based in London. Many thanks, a writer as well. Many thanks, Gulrukh Khan, for joining as part of today's Congress, and a warm welcome.
Thank you very much.
So let us perhaps start with through this Congress, we will try to offer a personal takes on Satyajit Ray with a bit of critical note on Satyajit's works. So perhaps the directors who have joined, they will perhaps describe their own personal take and how they found inspiration from the iconic filmmaker Satyajit Ray's work. So let us start with perhaps Ruxana Tabassum. Thank you, Tabassum, for joining again, and let us have your own take on Satyajit Ray's work.
So if you're a film student, then Satyajit Ray is one of the most important filmmakers you study during your film school. But to be very honest, I got exposed to Satyajit Ray's films as a young child who was only allowed to watch very limited cinema. So I grew up watching 3 of his films as a young girl. And to be very honest, I was just kind of, trying to figure out. I really enjoyed watching those films as a young child who did not have any sort of exposure to appreciate cinema at that point, But I really enjoyed all those emotions, all the simple stuff. And now, when after years later, as a film student, and later on now as an independent director, when I look at his work, I understand what a genius of a person he was, in order to kind of bring those emotions so amazingly on screen, so that you can relate to as an adult, you can relate to as at any stage of your life, perhaps. So those films, like for example, Pather Panchali, when I just was watching it like a couple of months back, in the trilogy I watched, and the sense of loss, and to be very honest, in the middle of this pandemic, and actually getting these news of someone or the other's death every second day. Now, when I feel those emotions, it's almost the same what I felt when Durga died in Pather Panchali, So I think it's only a genius of a man who can kind of portray those emotions. And also I feel what really influences my craft from Ray's film is I love the way how natural the environments that the setting of his films are. And to be very honest, now you see again that it's coming back in the Indian cinema again, where you want to shoot in real locations, and you want to shoot with non-actors, and you are the kind of acting style that you are again giving importance to. And so it's amazing that years ago, when the master actually did all of these things, so he has been a big influence. And also, like, I illustrate a little. So when I was studying in the film school, and once I had got my hands on this book, which kind of documented his entire journey of making Pother Panchali, I realized that he had actually hand drawn all the frames of the entire film. And it was like a big learning for me. And then you, as a student, you understand, as a filmmaker, you understand in what detail he actually went into researching on what he wanted to show in each frame. And I also picked up the habit from him, to be very honest, because I was really influenced by that particular style, because it gives you a lot of, you think ahead, you plan ahead, your every little movements, you kind of, you know what you're going to the set and trying to achieve. And so that was one of the very big influences that happened in early on in my life. And also, I would particularly talk about Charulata. The first scene of the film kind of always have influenced me and blew me up, to be very honest, where not a single dialogue was needed to talk about like the character of Charulata. If you remember, the film opens up with this woman who is who is just going from one window to the other, and she's trying to see the passerbys, and you know that this woman has so much time on her hand, and then she's just flipping through the pages of the book. So without saying much, it's a lonely, housewife, and it's a story of a lonely housewife. And suddenly, when you see her husband just crosses without even looking at her when she's standing on the door, and you know that the relationship immediately, this exposition without even having saying one dialogue, I think it was magical, to come with a scene where you say so much without making a scene with a lot of dialogues and stuff like that. So it's amazing. This his sheer brilliance has always influenced me. And now, to be very honest, as I'm growing as a filmmaker and I'm finding my own style, I am revisiting these films, and I also have seen the kind of I can see the kind of political themes of film like Gopi Gai and Bagha Bain also has, like where you say the futility of the war. As a young girl, I never understood that. For me, it was just like a film I was so happy watching because it had songs. So only I think a man who is like a master, who has the understanding of such complex subjects, can make it so simple that even a child can kind of grasp it. So I think these things. So I make a lot of films for children. Primarily, I started my career as an independent filmmaker making films for children. So my last film is called Apples and Oranges, and it's a satire, and it's a film on overcoming differences. So when I was writing this film, I kept all these things in mind, because for me, when I approached writing my film, I was thinking, how do you teach children to overcome differences? When we hardly know how to overcome differences. We can't accept a person who has a different opinion than ours. We unfriend them from Facebook. We stop talking to them. We can't take different political standings. We cannot take if someone thinks different from us. And then I thought about this film, and I said, wow, how beautifully this master, like Satyajit Ray could say this. So yeah, these are these lot of things that have influenced me over the years, and he continues to influence me. And so yeah, if you have any other question, Everett, I can go on.
Thank you. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Let me perhaps say, I know that many audiences joined from all corners of the world, which is great. So we'll try to read your input you are leaving in the comment box. Please don't think that we are ignoring you. I'll come back, but let us have some more uh, speeches, more input from our guest speakers. We have Gulrukh Khan. So I'll come back to you, Tabassum, Ruxana. And perhaps you covered some of those areas, but why Satyajit Ray is important to you? You covered some, but I'll come back perhaps later on. So we have Gulrukh Khan. Gulrukh Khan is a multi-awarded international filmmaker, writer, holistic specialist, gender and animal rights activist, public speaker, and high-level conference organizer. She has directed, produced, and scripted a diverse range of short films, education videos, and documentaries over 25 years. She has won awards Cannes and New York for her films. Her mantra for the New Millennium documentary was shown at the UN Peace Summit in the presence of Kofi Annan, and was the signature film at the Festival of Light in London in the presence of ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair and 2,000 business leaders. Her other awards include Lifetime Achievement in Film, Best Documentary Feature Ambassador for Peace, Iconic Women Leaders, Creating a Better World, Women Super Achiever Award, Exceptional Female Award, many other awards actually. So she has been a regular speaker at the House of Lords, Women Economic Forums, and has spoken at the World Forum amongst the world-class global events. She's a co-founder of Inclusion Convention CIC, which is the interdisciplinary think tank. So many, many thanks again, Gulrukh Khan, for joining. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very sweet of you to read that whole thing out. I'm going to approach this a little differently. I've sort of done a small tribute to Satyajit. First of all, I want to say thank you very, very much for inviting me, Ahmed and Saudha Arts. And it's a very special occasion, this centenary. And I've been a fan and admirer of Satyajit Ray for many, many years, having watched movies with my father growing up. He was always very, very different from everyone else, and sort of living in the UK, I found it quite fascinating watching sort of intellectual cinema as opposed to, you know, maybe just all the Bollywood stuff with people dancing around, you know, flower fields and things like that at the time. So let me just get on to Satyajit at the moment. I think he was an extraordinary visionary who actually brought simplicity and authenticity to the film industry, which is sort of swathed in glamour, over-dramatization, and an unwillingness to really touch real life and its issues. I mean, the fact that he directed 36 films approximately over his lifetime is a huge achievement for anyone. His work obviously consisted of features, documentaries, and short stories. In his work, he endorsed the concept of simplicity, raw emotion, and always honoring up and coming artists in his film, which I really respected. I think it was just amazing how he brought sort of unknowns to the foreground. He loved a solid story with congruity that left the viewer immersed and self-reflective, as well as reflective on the greater intellectual and domestic or greater community issues that he so often chose to direct with impeccability and from a place of heart and social conscience. This can be seen in his Apu trilogy, which covers so many social issues, including poverty. I mean, it was this very trilogy that actually set him apart from other directors and showed him to be humanitarian in his approach, despite critics saying that it romanticized poverty. In fact, this was really a turning point in cinema. I quote, Pattar Panjali, excuse my pronunciation, was among the films that pioneered the parallel cinema movement, which espoused authenticity and social realism. It was the first film from independent India to attract major international critical acclaim, winning India's National Film Award for Best Feature Film, the Best Human Documentary Award at the Cannes Film Festival, and several other establishing awards. And he was one of the country's obviously most distinguished filmmakers. His ability to make beautiful the simplest of moments that we all take for granted are what really strikes me as being profound. He lets us see things through the eyes of the personalities of the characters, and at times shows us the innocence of the human soul, surrounded by so much heaviness in the real world. I quote, much of his cinema's strength lies in the total impression of its average moments that can't be picked out as necessarily striking scenes. This is because he strikes a carefully judged balance between form and content. He does not let one part override the other. He was even known to reject locations because he thought that they were too spectacular and overpowering, and stated that they would upset the balance of the film. I also quote, "His films encompass a diversity of moods, techniques, and genres: comedy, satire, fantasy, and tragedy. Usually he made films in a realist mode, but he also experimented with surrealism and fantasy." This ability to be so diverse has been...
You've been muted, Gulru. Could you unmute
Okay.
yourself? Right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. His ability to be so diverse has been an inspiration and an education to filmmakers internationally. He seemed to be an authority on the vastness of life and emotions, whether it was from his own experience or a deep study of his own emotions or others' lives. The fact is, he was a master creator and teacher through his fluid ability to seamlessly incorporate such diversity into his work. Again, I quote, "When viewing one of his films, we often think we know what one of his characters is thinking and feeling without a single word of dialogue," which is actually really important. It's the silence between the scenes that really made impact. Some of the themes in his work have been very cleverly presented, and he's constantly using metaphors, which in my estimation is what holds him in a place of pioneer rather than artist. There are no obviously direct messages in his films, but thanks to structural coherence, we get the underlying message clearly and simply. In fact, we feel it intuitively rather than it needing to be spelled out for us. This was his magic touch, and so different from other Bollywood films where characters would be over the top in their range of expressions. For example, and I quote, "The Music Room, Jalsaghar, is an underrated film which is one of his finest achievements. Jalsaghar is the story of a gentleman, a feudal lord who ruins himself through holding music concerts to outclass the boorish upstart son of a moneylender. The film as a whole explores the idea that truly great art is created in that space of time just before disintegration takes over. Time seems to be frozen for the gentleman, and it is within this act of refusal that his ruin lies." Satyajit Ray seems to know the very essence of human aspiration as well as human frailty, and is able to subtly...
You have been muted again. Sorry. Yeah.
How each aspect of the human psyche has its part to play in how we manage to tackle our life, our own movement within it, as well as how we respond to external events. I quote, "There is perhaps no filmmaker who exercised such total control over his work as Satyajit Ray. He was responsible for scripting, casting, directing, scoring, operating the camera, working closely on art direction, and even editing and designing his own credit titles and PR material. His films come as close to complete personal expression as may be possible, and his style grows out of the material itself and from an inner compulsion to express it clearly. By his own admission, his films are the antithesis of conventional Hollywood films, and his characters are generally of average ability and talents. All sort of weird stuff rarely appears in his films because his interest lies in characters with their roots in society. What fascinates him is the struggle and corruption of the conscience-stricken person, and he brought real concerns of real people to the screen. So his works serve to remind us of the wholeness and sanctity of the individual. And above all, his is a cinema of thought and feeling, in which the feeling is deliberately restrained because it's so intense. Although he continued to obviously experiment with subject matter and style with most directors, he always held true to his original conviction that the finest cinema uses strong, simple themes containing hundreds of little, apparently irrelevant details, which only help to intensify the illusion of actuality better. And these themes cannot come from passing fashions of the period. They must be drawn from permanent values. Do I have time? Another 3-4 minutes?
Okay.
Yep. He's also made several films that show the inner struggle, obviously, between traditional and modern values in Indian life, which of course is an ongoing subject being tackled in real time by this current generation. And he was ahead of his time in being able to accurately define these issues, albeit in different decades. And times move so fast and change has been immense in India, but somehow the timeless nature of his depiction still holds true. I'm not going to talk about two other films because I think we're probably running out of time. But obviously there was the film The Goddess, which was very profound, and also Shatranj Ki Khilari, which was a very big statement. But to really sort of take it to the end, really, and I'll miss out a big chunk. He went to Tagore's school. He learned painting. He learned drawing. He followed Tagore so much and was so influenced. And you know, in life, we have so much synchronicity and magic that happens. And the most synchronistic and magical thing for Satyajit Ray was his first encounter with Tagore when, as a child, he gave him a book to write an autograph in. And Tagore basically wrote a poem in there that said, "For many a year, I have traveled many a mile to lands far away. I've gone to see the mountains, the oceans I've been to view. But I fail to see that lay not 2 steps from my home on a sheaf of paddy grain, a glistening drop of dew." It was almost like a secret message from the master to the initiate, which went on to influence his life and totally summed up the approach that he had towards his work and the profound message he actually passed to his students. The message being that everything was right in front of us and that we needed to see even the most minuscule things to make sense of the magnitude of life. And I'll end it there.
Thank you. Many, many thanks, Gulru Khan, for your wonderful input to this Congress. This is an honor to have Adoor Gopalakrishnan ji as part of this Congress. Namaste, Adoor ji, for joining, and a warm welcome. And let us have, I know that you are quite busy, and many thanks for agreeing to participate this Congress. And also from Bangladesh, one of the phenomenal post-independence filmmakers, Tanvi Mukammal, joined. Many thanks, Tanvi Bhai, for joining, and a warm welcome. I will come back to Sanjay, Professor Sanjay Mukhopadhyay, just after perhaps Adoor Gopalakrishnan. I know Sanjay Da has something else to do. So Sanjay Da, would you think it's okay if I just have Adoor Gopalakrishnan ji now, and then if I come back to you afterwards? Is that okay? Would you be able to unmute yourself, because you are muted? If you kindly unmute, yeah. Have you managed to? Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
You are, yes. Yes, you are audible.
Do you expect me to talk now?
Yes, if I was just asking, if I have Adoor Gopalakrishnan ji before you, will that be okay? Or you need, I mean, because I know you are joining in.
One appeal, actually I have a program online with Dhaka.
No, that's fine.
Yes,
yeah, okay.
So
yeah,
if you kindly allow me to speak about 10 minutes, I'll be happy.
Okay, go.
My regards to Adoor Gopalakrishnan as a senior most citizen of Indian cinema. But
yeah,
I'm taking his permission to talk about 10 minutes.
Okay,
so
great.
we start.
Please
a very happy afternoon, and I thank you all. My warm regards and thanks to my colleagues and to Kaiser for inviting me in the Centenary moment, the great moment. In fact, you may call it epiphany if you refer to the history of Asian cinema. Why the moment of epiphany? Why should we remember Satyajit Ray just because he was born 100 years ago on 2nd May 1921? No. Actually, you'd see that he was the first person to deal with the problem of language in cinema. As we all know, cinema does offer a kind of language, but it is not at all similar to the language which we use in our day-to-day parlance. It's not like English or Bangla. It's not like Hindi or Urdu. It's a typical science system which somehow finds similarities with oral languages, but it is more user-friendly as far as it, in contrast with, and as far as we consider written language. So what did he fundamentally do with Pather Pachali? When he adapted Pather Pachali for cinematic production, what is the basic revolution in it? Because he, for the first time in Indian subcontinent, taught us to see through images. And by images, he meant visual images. If you look at the history of Indian cinema, or cinema in general, you would find cinema was basically a means of entertainment. And then it was supposed to tell a story. Satyajit did tell a story, but for him, the storytelling was not fundamental. It was not the essence of the matter, not the crux of the matter. He took up Pather Pachali, not wholly, he selected, edited a part, and then composed it. And if you kindly look this movement, you would see it contains a basic critique of existing cinema. The way Truffaut's first film, François Truffaut, first film, La 400 coups, the 400 blows, if you compare it with Pather Pachali, you would find in both sides of the Atlantic, there was a conscious and very serious search for the invention of language in cinema. Satyajit Ray, in his first essay of his life, long before making Pather Pachali, what is wrong with Indian films, he said that Indian films usually suffer from a very false explanation of the word movement. For them, movement usually mean action, and action is equated with melodrama. And for us who live in this part of the planet, the analogy with music will fail because Indian music is largely improvisational. Therefore, he was more dependent on the movement pattern of Mozart, Beethoven, post-democratic European music, in the sense that both cinema and music are artistic forms that may be called sculpting in time. So what did Pather Pachali do? It comprised images. And what did these images say? An image was made to state visual perceptions. Visual perception which comes basically from the light. Satyajit, though it is often said that he was greatly influenced when he landed in London by seeing Ladri di Bicyclette, Vittorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves. On the very first date he arrived in London, the BFI. But I would seek your permission to disagree with this argument. He was very much, in fact, possessed by the presence of Jean Renoir. It was Jean Renoir, during his visit in 1949 in Kolkata, taught him that light is a key word in cinema. And if you look at Satyajit Ray film, you'd feel the music of light actually is a painting with light. The difference between dawn and dusk, the difference between early morning and late morning, the difference between afternoon and evening, you'd feel it is palpable there within black and white photography. If you look at the famous Kash flower sequence in Pather Pachali, you would see it resembles more painting than cinematic narrative because it's a kind of landscape, very well drawn, using a kind of harmony between black and white. And by inventing this language, which is largely a semi-silent language, I borrow this word from Eric Roemer, who, while reviewing François Truffaut's 400 blows, said it's a half-silent movie. Because Truffaut too, while he criticized contemporary French cinema, in his now famous essay, a tendency in French cinema, he said that there are no good cinema or bad cinema, only author cinema. Authorism means a kind of signature. Satyajit Ray offered a kind of signature using pictorial images in Indian cinema. If you carefully look at the Opu trilogy, the child Opu in Pather Pachali, the young Opu in Aparajito, and the family man in Opur Sangsar, and if you contrast them with the 70s trilogy, the city trilogy, the adversary, I mean Pratidwandi, made in 1971, the Company Limited, made in 1973, and the city, made in 1974, John Orwell, you would see it's a kind of modernist manifesto which suffers from the intrinsic dilemma of the transformation of rural life and city life. In a post-colonial environment, it was much easier for him to locate Opu as an emerging citizen in Pather Pachali, Aparajito, and Opu Sangsar. He had in his veins basically a kind of 19th century lineage, which we call Bengal awakening or the birth of New Bengal, which actually taught us to see everything through reason, which taught us to reason everything with reason. And Aparajito or Opu, the protagonist, was a character who could look at everything rationally. At least he tried to. When he landed up in Kolkata, when he began to write something for a journal in Opu Sangsar, everywhere we would find that despite poverty, despite his wretchedness and other things, he could dream. He had a kind of imaginary existence, a kind of imagination. But later, during the early 70s, this kind of imagination had to undergo a kind of metamorphosis which did not fit well with the thought that we had during 19th century awakening, that reason will be the ultimate panacea for solving all our problems. It did not take place in India because we had no industrial revolution, and that is why his protagonists in the 70s, Siddhartha, Shyamolendu, and Somnath, all failed, and they had a journey to the end of midnight. And Satyajit had a bitter, almost caustic conversation with his environment. He was a person dedicated to the cause of history, and he was that desperate as to go outside the textual domain of filmmaking to generate meanings as far as possible for Indian cinema. We are thankful to him that he was the first person who invaded our cultural practice to treat cinema as an illustrated book. He was the first person to come into a dialogue with his audience to make them feel that cinema may be understood using other medium also. It should be seen. It should be heard, and one should not expect only a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, he is there. He made so many films, right from Pather Pachali to Aguntu, but every film contains a kind of historical consciousness. It is not an exercise in image formation. In that case, we could tell that he was a filmmaker extraordinary, but I call him more than that. He was a chronicler of history, of Indian history. And if you look at him very closely, if you take close reading, then you would see that he could trace the graph of Indian people's existence, our existence, in Oriental terms. And that is a very important point, because with him and with Akira Kurosawa, the concept of national cinema was born. Before that, we had two kinds of cinemas. One, Hollywood cinema, simply made for entertainment, and the authorist cinema in Europe, which foregrounded the concept of artistic formation in cinema. Of course, I would admit that in Hollywood too, you find great artists like John Ford, Alfred Hitchcock, and others. But it was mainly an industrial system. And in direct opposition to that, in France, Italy, and Spain, we find other kind of cinemas, which was mainly important for its artistic aspirations. Satyajit Ray in between found a space. He could carve out a space where the nation could find a kind of autonomous space to speak out. For that matter, you can refer to Franz Fanon when he wrote The Wretched of the Earth. The Wretched of the Earth could speak out because of him. Then came the other filmmakers. He was, as his comrade, Ritik Kumar Ghatak and others. We may also refer to the Mrinal Sen, that at this moment, I must say that he constituted the moment of awakening, moment in the Hegelian sense of term, a moment constituted historically. He was, in Bakhtin's terms, a historically situated utterance. Pather Pachali, the moment Opu opened his eyes, Indian cinema learned how to open its eyes, and we are indebted that right from those days, we became free to interpret the way we like to interpret the world, not in terms of adapting fictional stories, but in terms of our freedom to feel. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Many thanks, Professor Sanjay Mukhopadhyay, for this profound input to this session. Many thanks again.
Thank
So
you.
let us come
sir.
back to Adoor Gopalakrishnan ji, a shaper, a true shaper of Indian cinema after Satyajit Ray. He's an Indian, as you all know, he's an Indian film director, scriptwriter, producer, and is regarded as one of the most notable filmmakers in India at this moment. With the release of his first feature film, Swayambharam, Adoor Gopalakrishnan pioneered the new wave in Malayalam cinema during the 1970s. So I don't think Adoorji needs any more introduction. Many thanks, Adoorji. It's an honor to have you as part of today's session. Over to you now.
Thank you. Am I audible?
You are audible. Yes.
Yeah. Well, there have been profound talks, I do not want to talk theory here. I first saw Pather Panchali in 1958 when I was a student at the Rural Institute in Gandhigram, Madurai. So we happened to have one Mr. Dotto from Shantiniketan working there as an art specialist. So he brought a 16mm print of Pather Panchali. And one evening, this 16mm print was being screened and it was announced. So I had no idea about it. At that time, I was not even a film fan. I was basically a theater person. But my professor, who was very knowledgeable, he told me this film is going to be from someone who studied in, he's an artist who studied in Shantiniketan. And he has made this film and he got some award outside India. This was all the information I had. And in 1958, that means a long time back, there was no system of subtitles. So the film was being screened in the original without any dialogue being translated. So I watched the film, with all attention, and I could not follow any dialogue in the film, of course. So there were not too many dialogues. What I appreciated in the film was the film looked very, very unlike anything I had seen before, in terms of cinema. So in those days, if you see a film like that, people will say, no, this is documentary. I think this was the kind of response it had in Calcutta also when it was shown. A lot many people dismissed it as documentary because it has no painted faces, it had no typical storyline, it had no melodrama. So it was very unlike any other film. So this was the and this was the way I saw it. What I liked about it was no people were, the characters were not painted. Their faces were not painted. They looked very real. No, again, this was the first discovery for me. And this old woman, every wrinkle on her face was visible, and she was. I remember her as a great face from that film. Like that, each scene, visually appealed to me. Orally, I had very little understanding of what really happened. You had to know what they speak, etc. So it took 4 years for me to see Padar Panjali again when I joined the Film Institute in 1962. So this was like, again, I started seeing it again and again and again. My professors were showing it with sound, without sound, with all that, without the picture and only the sound, things like that. It's very interesting exercise. It was practically, Professor Bahadur had joined at that time, the institute, and Professor Bahadur as well as Pratik Katak, both of them joined in 1962 at the institute, not in 63, my second year at the institute. They were both great people, two great people. One was a great theoretician. He understood cinema so well. The other was absolutely an erratic genius, I must say, Katak, and was a great teacher. So I had this opportunity at the institute to watch the same film several times, and I slowly started understanding cinema. So it was not the only film which I saw. I saw films from all over the world, right from the beginning of the invention of cinema. I saw films through decades and its progress, etc. With Professor Bahadur there, Bahadur made this Padar Panjali a text for so many batches of students who passed through the institute. And very rightly, that was the right text for any Indian student to learn from. Although we study and watch films from particularly France, Italy, Germany, and so many other countries, not particularly American films, so they are different, belong to a different category altogether. But European cinema particularly, and also Russian films of that period, we watched with great interest. And for us, what really mattered to us was Padar Panjali and other films he made in the Adoor trilogy. And Pratik Katak, also people thought he was an adversary of Satyajit Ray. Far from it. He had great admiration for Ray. While he used to screen his own films, talk about it, and etc. That was great learning for us. And then he also used to show Ray's films. And I remember some passages, when it came to some passages in the film, he would stop the film and say, look at it. Here is great cinema. This was a great learning for us. Coming from another master, appreciation of a real master. But what really, the great thing that happened to Indian cinema was that they came to the scene with this background of being a painter, being a writer, being so many things, combined into one person. This was a complete master of arts coming to work in cinema. That made a big difference. It was no more the same, although he had this, actually his self-training in films, watching Hollywood films. That's what he has written, told also on several occasions. He also had the opportunity with the Kolkata Film Club, started by himself and Saudha. He also had the opportunity to watch several films from the Soviet Union and some of the important films from even USA, etc. And then he had this great opportunity. He was introduced through this documentary filmmaker, Harisadan Dasgupta, who had known the river director. Suddenly the name doesn't come to me. He came to Calcutta looking for locations for river, and from him, he and his friends learned a lot. One of the things he told them was, Renova, yes, now it comes. Jean Renova. Yes, he told them, look, don't make films. Don't ever make films like Hollywood. Don't make Hollywood your model. You have to make films, Indian films. Talk about Indian reality. Look at Indian reality. Interpret it the way you watch it and learn it and imbibe it. I think this was a great lesson for him. And he was, every day it seems, he went to the location, watched Renova shooting. Actually that was the real influence for Satyajit, as somebody else mentioned here.
They tell me about Renova went to India to make the film called River.
Yes, River. That was actually, River was produced by an American company from Hollywood only. Hollywood had produced that film. Still he said, don't make films like Hollywood. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. And Ray took the advice very solely. And then he's watching. In fact, when he went to London on a mission to of this company for which he was working for special training, etc. He watched in 6 months' time. He watched more than 100 films, it seems, and many of them were films that belong to the neo-realistic genre. But the Western critics, and as well as our own critics imitating them, have a tendency to call Ray's films neo-realistic. It's very wrong. Very, very wrong. Now, neorealism was a product of the Second World War and its aftermath, particularly in Italy, how they were devastated, particularly the city of Rome, and how it affected everything, our life, how they were suddenly impoverished, they were without job, the kind of situation. It was total disaster in terms of even human values. That was a very pathetic situation that was promoting the making of those films. And Ray was not doing that. And Father Panjali is not about poverty, as some people tend to believe. In fact, it is about life in the Indian village. It may look poor for the so-called rich and the fashionable, but they were not poor. They were rich with life's vision, with positivity about things, with life lived with a certain feeling of equanimity about things. Life, death, everything comes. The birth of a child, it starts almost together with the birth of Abu's birth. Birth of Abu one day. And the old woman, you see several deaths in the film, in the trilogy, but then you also see the whole flow of the life, with all these things, it's a great feeling. It's like, I compare it with Mahabharata, the trilogy, because it has everything in it. It has everything in it. In terms of aesthetics, it is so beautiful. There is, the idea of despair is not there. The very, 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 very basic, for the first time, I would say, the Abu trilogy, gave me the impression that here is great Indian cinema. No other cinema can be called great Indian cinema like that. That it has the Indian ethos, it has Indian value system. It is very unlike Slumdog Millionaire, which is an antithesis of anything Indian, which is lauded here and that, applauded, given awards and all that. So Ray, the dignity of the characters, the way they face the life, the life, seen through the Indian eyes, it is all there in the film. It was great learning for me. And I personally owe a great debt to, I'd say, Manikda. I wouldn't even call him Satyajit Ray. I call him Manikda. And he had a special feeling for me, for affection for me. And I am so grateful to him because he was a great, I gave him a great encouragement in my work. So I'm very, very passionately involved with his memories and his work. So even very, very same people. In fact, in Cannes Festival, they did not consider the film for any major award. And when George Saudha, the historian, insisted this film should be recognized. He insisted, thanks to this person. He's a remarkable person, George Saudha, the historian and a critic. He said this film should be recognized, and he insisted, and he got this certificate, which was not like an award announced or anything. It was a certificate, but it did not mean much at that time. It really Satyajit Ray took off with Abhirajito winning the Venice Award. The same thing happened to Kurosawa. His career also started with winning the Venice Award for Rashomon. It's very interesting. Their life has been almost similar, although Ray was not attached to any studio. Kurosawa had to work within the studio system. The systems were different. Satyajit remained an outsider to the so-called industry. He was an outsider. And he fought against the system without saying so. But what he did was real revolt against what was despicable in terms of an industry. You cannot call it an industry. No. So there were parallels. So Kurosawa faced the same thing. The Tei company, which was producing the studio, which was producing the film, they gave him very little money, and they did not consider it was a worthwhile film even when it was made. Somehow it got entered in Venice Festival because there was an Italian film person seeing the film and recommending it to the festival there. Even when the film was selected in Venice, they did not care to inform Kurosawa that this film has been chosen in Venice. It's very strange. Such things did not happen to our own Satyajit Ray. He got, it took 3 years for him to make his first film. But then Providence had it that there was a very well-informed viceroy who gave him the money, 2 lakhs of rupees, to complete the film, to do the whole production. In fact, he could pay off his debts with that money also. And that, under what section of the government? Public Works Department, because it was about a road, other Pajjaki. It's a road, song of the road. So that was the justification given. They never realized that it was going to be a great film. And by accident, the West Bengal government was going to become a producer of a great film, which is considered one of the best ever made in cinema. So these things were happening. And Ray lived up to it, the expectations given by the Adoor trilogy, and then each film of his. In fact, my favorite films are other than the trilogy films, the Jalsakar and Devi, and the children's film Sonar Kella. These are my most favorite films. Once I asked him, Manikda, what is your favorite film? He said,
Kanchenjunga, is it?
No. He said, where you have this Charulata.
Charulata, yeah.
He considered it perfect. So then I told him, Manikda, I don't agree with you. Your choice is okay, but my choice is Abhirajito. This is one film where I've never read anything like that in literature. I've never seen it in any film also that I have seen, that a relationship between the son and the mother.
Exactly.
Such beautiful depiction of it, with all the pain, with all the happiness, with all the expectations, with all the depressions, with all the, nobody else has attempted it. Because I also discovered it recently, that it was because Ray's father died when he was very young, just 2 years old. And the mother, Suprabha Roy, she was a single parent for him. And she practically, and she was a very, very learned person, she had many faculties like painting, sculpturing, so many things. She was adapted to so many things. She was a remarkable woman. And at her young age, she became a widow, and she lived for this boy, who was she called him Manik. And then we all call him Manikda. So it is that relationship you could bring into this role of the Abu boy and the mother. And I've never seen such depiction of the son growing up and the mother becoming lonely. And his world is expanding. The boy's world is expanding, and he becomes youth, and her world is contracting. He went back to herself, and then she dies in his absence. It's a every time I saw it, I wept.
Wow.
I wept.
Wow.
Because somehow it connected with my own life, maybe. But I also told him, this is. Then he said, Adoor, I did not do. I had some more cutting to do with that film. When I told him that's my favorite film, but the Venice people insisted. They were rushing to send it to the festival, so I had to rush it. Then I told him, look, Manikda, don't touch it. It's a great film. Don't touch it, please. He smiled. So that is the kind of relationship I had with Ray and his films. Yes, that's all.
Thank you. Many thanks, Satyajit, for this profound input and wonderful illumination of memory. I'm not sure why Western world would like to see him as a neorealist filmmaker. Was it because of the resemblance of Italian, or more specifically, Viscontian film? Viscontian, he himself was a big fan of Viscontian. Is it because of this? Because someone also wrote, Shantanu Goswami echoed what you said, that she's more of humanist filmmaker instead of neorealist filmmaker. Is it? I'm not sure.
Why should anybody frame him? You put me off or what?
No. You are audible. Yes.
No. Why should anybody try to do this? Because all his films, if they want to, give an adjective to realism, don't call it realism. Call it, in his case, you can call it romantic realism if you want, because it's very lyrical. It's a lyrical realism, in fact. Yes. So to call it, dub it, neorealism is being very cruel to the work. That is dubbing it to one pocket. That is very wrong.
True.
In the whole, this is very wrong.
True. Thank you very much, Adoorji, again for joining to this Congress and such a wonderful input on Satyajit's work and the memory you illuminated. Again, let me come back to Bhaskar Chattopadhyay now. Bhaskar Chattopadhyay is a writer, film. Is an author, translator, and columnist living and working in Bangalore. He has written over a dozen of books that have been published by Penguin, Random House, HarperCollins, and Bhaskar has written 5 original novels so far, creating the popular fictional detective. He has translated such authors as Rabindranath Tagore, Prem Chand, Vibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay, wow, wonderful, Satyajit Ray, and many others. And then Bhaskar has worked extensively in researching the life and the works of Satyajit Ray. His translated anthology 14 stories that inspired Satyajit Ray became a bestseller. And he has also novelized Satyajit Ray's landmark 1966 film, Nayak. So many thanks again, Bhaskar Chaturvedi, for joining.
Thank you.
Over to you for your
Well,
own take.
well, yeah, I mean, quite a serious academic discussion. I wouldn't really know what to say. However, I would not like to theorize too much, as just like uh, Adoor sir didn't. Um, but I have been writing a book trying to write a book on the cinema of Ray. And maybe what I do during the time that you've allowed me to speak is to just share some observations that I have come across, and maybe that could be of some value to this session. Um, this is the 100th year of Ray's birth, and as Professor Mukhopadhyay said, that why is it that we are celebrating the centenary of Satyajit Ray's birth? I mean, uh, what is so special about Satyajit Ray's birth, and so on and so forth. I would personally believe that apart from being a great filmmaker, whatever little I have learned while researching about him was the person behind the name Satyajit Ray, or the image of Satyajit Ray. You know, one of the things which I have come across is how closely knit was his unit. And in several interviews, we have heard him say that, along with making films, and he was an extremely practical man. So along with making films to express what he wanted to say, filmmaking was also a living for him as well as his unit. So he had to make, or at least try to make, one film every year, just so that his unit could earn their bread, earn their living. So so that aspect of it struck me as something which is not talked about very often. And here was a man who the entire world recognizes as somebody who is like a path-breaking filmmaker. But here was a man who was thinking in so simple terms as just merely earning a living, for himself as well as his unit. And that was something which really struck me as the being very humane, and the practicality of his approach to filmmaking. In the same tone, I have also, whenever I was interviewing several people from the film industry, and both from the Bengali film industry as well as from the industries outside West Bengal. And it struck me that everybody was in awe of the efficiency with which he used to make his films. There was no great hullabaloo, and there was no great as I said, theorizing, or the entire film used to be chalked out, as Ms. Tabassum said in the beginning of this session. It was entirely chalked out in his head. And as one of his actors, Pradeep Mukherjee, who starred in John Orno, told me in an interview, that all that he was doing was simply playing back the reel in his head and just executing it and just trying to print it on film. Storyboarding is something that was always had been a habit of his. The costumes, the look, everything, the dialogues, everything was in his head, and that's just remarkable. It's not just creative genius. because creative genius can be associated with a bit of eccentricity as well. This was a man who was extremely pragmatic, and he knew the craft of filmmaking and the disadvantages and the problems that came along with it, and he knew how to subvert them, how to overcome those hurdles, and to go about make films in very, very little budgets, staying out of the studio system, as was just mentioned. And he would make this absolute masterpieces without much fuss, without much fanfare or fuss. That itself is something which is a great lesson for, I think filmmakers of today. I am not a filmmaker myself, but when I think about it, I personally believe that you need to be extremely efficient at what you do, along with giving vent to your a creative vision. Um, at the same time, and I know that this is an auspicious occasion, and we must, say all the nice things about Satyajit Ray and so on and so forth. But I have also believed, I'm 42 years old. I have spent almost all my life talking about Satyajit Ray, trying to understand the man, and so on and so forth. But I also believe that there is a certain amount of lack of critical analysis of Ray's work. And that bothers me. It bothers me because I think he would have been the last person to be happy with that. If I was reading an interview of I think Mr. Sham Benegal, and where he said that he kept you at an arm's length, and he whatever feedback he used to give you, it used to be absolutely spot on honest, and there was no sweetness or positivity or things like that mixed in it. It was absolutely spot on. So that is something which I think, as people, as the audience, as responsible members of the audience who see, Satyajit Ray has passed on to the great beyond. This is the centenary year of his birth. But as responsible members of the audience, I think we need to build a culture of doing enough critical analysis. Critique is something which is essential to the arts. So if there is something which we see, which we feel that should not be in the place where it is, a smudge on an otherwise perfect portrait, we need to talk about it. So there is I personally feel there is a bit of a culture of hero worship, which needs to, which at least I'm not comfortable with. So that is another thing. I also personally want to talk about subtitles, the subtitles to his films. Look, cinema, as we all know, and very rightly so, is a visual medium. I don't know, there are many eminent people on this panel, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was Coppola who had said that the talkies arrived too early in cinema. As soon as the talkies arrived, we started to box cinema in certain silos, in certain compartments, and we went on making the same kind of films over and over again. It was almost something of a forced projection. We were almost, thrusting ideas down the audience's throat. Cinema is not that, in my limited understanding of the medium. Cinema is very, very visual, which is also why you will appreciate the fact that despite the very, very poor quality of subtitles that are associated with Satyajit Ray's films, his films are so widely accepted all around the world. Adoor said that he didn't understand anything from the first film that he watched because there was no subtitles. He didn't speak the language. He didn't understand it. And yet it appealed to him. Have we ever wondered why? So of course, I mean, the visual, Satyajit Ray's visual language was extremely strong. Having said that, we cannot deny the fact that the subtitles exist in the film, in his films today. So if the cinema is so strong, but the subtitles are of, let's say, not so great quality, I think there is a mismatch somewhere. I would rather say remove all the subtitles altogether and let people enjoy, let people from all over the world who do not understand the Bengali language just go ahead and enjoy the film. That is still okay. But having subtitles which are of not great quality is, I personally think it's a bit unacceptable. So I would encourage people to come forward and see what can be done to do better subtitling. Criterion is doing it. I am aware of that. And they're doing a wonderful job of preservation and restoration as well. Many
So
thanks to them.
is this kind of a message to filmmakers that try to develop the power of visual language instead of the textual language that can restrict the audience's imagination?
Well, who am I to guide,
Right.
dictate terms to filmmakers? We have some wonderful filmmakers here as well. But I personally think that the medium, my understanding of the medium, Kashibhai, is that it's primarily visual. And as I don't know whether it was Hitchcock who said that a good film is one in which you can simply switch off the dialogues or switch off the sound, and the audience will have a perfectly good idea about what is happening on screen. So that's what I'm talking about. So the visual language of Satyajit is not a problem at all. It's absolutely brilliant. It's fascinating. But the mismatch between the quality of what we are seeing and what we are reading on the screen is something which does bother me. And I think I wish something. See, I'm talking about this because I'm a translator myself. So what I hear in terms of the dialogue and what I read, there is just no. There are moments on screen when there is absolutely no subtitles when a character on the screen is going on speaking.
Exactly.
Imagine how would it come across to somebody who doesn't understand the language?
Thank you. Yeah.
Right, I'm done. That's all I wanted to say.
Many thanks, Bhaskar Chattopadhyay, for your own take on Satyajit. We also have another speaker who have already joined, a writer and a filmmaker and a singer, Sangeeta Dutta. Many thanks, Sangeeta Dutta, for joining as part of today's Congress. I'll come back to you after Tanvi Mukammal, but many thanks for joining and a warm welcome to today's Congress. I would like to come back to Tanvi Mukammal, but before I do this, let me just read some perhaps audiences from many audiences from all different, most of the parts of, many audiences who joined and kept inputting with their beautiful comments. Thank you to all of you. Shantanu Goswami, agree with Adurji, Dr. Farah Syed, great discussions, good to know about the valuable experiences from living legends. Pretty much grateful. So this will continue till tomorrow as well. So it will start at 3 p.m. tomorrow, just for information. 3 p.m. UK time, and 8 p.m. Bangladesh time, 7:30 Indian time. Sanjay Day, I'm really enjoying. Gulrukh Khan said sound is a bit of problem. So please let us know whether this problem exists till now. I can hear actually, but if you find it problematic still now, please let us know. Ananya Chakraborty, Satyajit Ray, the epitome of Indian cinema filmmaking, for us to show. Devashish Chandra, it uses indeed a learning experience. Great, Devashish Chakraborty. Thanks to Adurji for the speech, which is so natural and lively, interesting to film enthusiasts. Thank you very much for your comments. Let me come back to Tanvi Mukammal, a film director, an author, writer, and public intellectual in Bangladesh. Many thanks, Tanvi Mukammal, for joining as part of Saudha International Satyajit Congress today. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Kaisa. Actually, so many things have been already said. And the very variegated nature of Satyajit's talent always amazes me. I mean, the man who had made 36 films, just imagine 36 full-length feature films. And then he also wrote 17 Feluda books, quite a few Professor Shonku science fictions. And you know, it's not very easy to write science fictions. Then he edited the Sandesh magazine, a great graphic artist who invented the rare M1 type. So a man with so many qualities. And also look at his films. I mean, yes, of course, some people will often say neo-realist and this and that, but he also makes films of so much variegated nature. Just think that the great social realist films like Aparajito or Mahanagar, Shimamoto. But at the same time, he made fantasy films. He made Upigain Bhagavan. He made dealt with chamber films like chamber music, few instruments, only 4 or 5 characters like Charulata, Avantika Sunstein. And then also he made historical period films like Shatran Kilori, and even purely entertaining children films like Shonar Kella. So just see the variegated nature of talent of this man. That awes me really. That I'm amazed. Very few filmmakers in the world has talent of so many variegated nature. Of course, neorealism, it has been much debated how much has influenced or not. But definitely when he went to London, he watched. Of course, he would have made Paul Pachal in any case, but he was definitely influenced uh, uh, by Sekal Thief, and he himself admitted that, and he saw the film quite a few times and other films of that genre. So, but there is no denying the fact that the influence was there. And if we consider that the elements of neorealism, like social realism, then human struggles, human family, human movements, and also if you say the technical aspects of filmmaking, the craftsmanship, the mise-en-scène, the way he depicted, or his emphasis on details. So these are definite some influence might have maybe from Italian realism. For the details, of course, here the Indian traditions also. Mahabharata himself said is something a grove of details. And then I think that nature plays a very fundamental role in Kshatriya films. Here, I think, of course, he was influenced of student of Nandalal Bose in Shantiniketan. He was perhaps influenced by Renoir while you were camping Calcutta for shooting river. These are facts. But I think it was something inbuilt in him, this love for nature. And his nature in his films are not something neutral. They seems to be take part in it. That we also see in Shakespeare and King Lear and places. Nature takes a part, storm comes. So the here where the later, very positive later comes from Warrior after many, many months that he has managed some job or something. Even the water insects, they dance and march. The whole nature is in march. And then Kanchenjunga, everyone could see that great mountain peak. But the Kanchenjunga didn't show up to that particular man who was so egocentric, who was so patriotic, and for whose egocentrism so many lives of his family become so miserable. So it's a kind of punishment to him. He won't be able to see Kanchenjunga. Others will be able to see the beauty of it. So nature plays a role in these films, I guess, somewhere or other. And rural Bengal, that's very surprising. Just Rao never lived in a village. He was a very much city dweller, a metropolitan man. But how come he could present rural Bengal so well, better than anyone else ever? I think he had this urban mind and with his cosmopolitan outlook, he dissected the Bengal village with a modern sensibilities. That's very important. And that's why he could uphold the poverty and the problematics of rural life so greatly than any other. And but not only the rural life, I think when he dealt with the middle class, urban middle class, Who could do it better than him? He showed what should I say, the ultimate of ambition of this corporate middle class in Company Limited, Shimamon. He also showed the ultimate limit of escapism, how far you can escape the ordinary Dinrat. You can never escape because your middle class self goes along with you. And then, of course, the moral degradation and fall of how far middle class values can deteriorate in Jono Arunda when the protagonist is ready to sell his friend's sister's body for profit. And then also the possibility of human upliftment of the same middle class in Mahanagar when Aruti resigned from job, knowing the job was so vital for his family. Yet she took a moral stand. So all aspects of middle class, his fall and his possibilities, all were depicted very well by Satyajit Ray. I think his films are of mostly of human relationship. I think nobody else, I have at least Indian filmmakers who dealt with human relationships so nuanced, so delicately. Relations between the mother and son and Parajito, among siblings in Shakha Poshakha, and all of the films, Charulata, and the man and woman relationship in Varibadi as well, Triangle Love. And then it is said in the world of art and literature that the secret of success in art is to depict the woman characters perfectly. Very few men artists can do it. Surprisingly, Satyajit did it excellently well. Of course, for Oputri, he created some amazing characters on screen. Indeed, Thakur, Durga, the Shorbojoya, Onongubu, name it. All are excellent, very well delineated female characters. But of course, for Oput trilogy, I guess he was much benefited by the talent of Vibhuti Bhushan to depict those characters. But to present them on the screen visually and believably, that credit goes to Shakespeare, definitely. And he created some very sensitive women like Charulata. He also created such soul-searching, with immense sensibility, the women like Bimola, or the one Aruti, I said, Mahabharata, who took Mahanagar, who took a firm stand for a cause. So this depicting of Bengali women, or women in general, Satyajit Ray has showed his own talent, I'm sure. And then what is the bottom line, actually, is art? I guess it is humanism. People have talked about it, humanism. And humanity in different conditions. And he was a deep, profound sense of sympathy for human beings. Consider all the characters, the main protagonists, even the minor characters, we call them. And there is, I always notice a kind of sympathetic lens towards his characters. He is never critical. Even the cantankerous Shejobo, the neighboring wife woman who makes a tantrum because Durga took a fruit or something from the garden. You remember at the end there is this scene. She comes with a lot of fruits when the family was living and said, "I knew I did a mistake. I did wrong to you." So the possibility of change of every human being, that he had believed in this human change, equality, no, not black and white. Every human being has a possibility. Even Hero Prajadesh, very ironically, at the end of the film, it is the Hero Praja himself come down and Dorim Marutan himself started pulling down to let this autocracy go, not the person. So he was not against any person, but the evil is the system. In Pathir Pachali, there is no villain. The villain is poverty. And this system, the post-colonial state and the politics and the economic creates this poverty. So somehow he brings us to in front of a wall where things must cease or change. But as things cannot cease, it must have to change. He was not an avid Marxist. He was not a great believer of class struggle or something. But he always hinted that things have to be changed. The insufferable poverty of Pathir Pachali suffering of this innocent human beings. What leads to us? That his village setup has to be changed. Something else has to be done. So this is, I think, it's a very Renaissance kind of humanism, and putting human beings at the center of everything. This is what Renaissance taught us. And then Shruti said that I believe in human beings. I'm committed to human beings, and I believe that is enough commitment. So this very Bengal Renaissance that began in 19th century, and Ram Mohan, Dashavar, and the best flower of it will be always Rabindranath Tagore. I think Satyajit Ray is the last of the Mohicans, the last Bengal Renaissance humanist, great humanist, that showed to put our eyes again back to human beings. See, he said somewhere that I don't. God is something as depicted in the religious books. I'm not. I can't buy it. Something like that. That interests me. So it's not God. It's not destiny. Then who is? It's human beings. That makes that always interesting for him. And see, and when they're regarding the religious practices and the superstitions, how strong he can be. Just see, watch the film Devi. How strong at that time against the society. And we see now in the event today how much these religious superstitionism or these communal feelings are affecting lives of people. And then another film, this Ganoshotra. So the problem religion creates in the subcontinent. So this he was very much that way, and a modern man, and will remain eternally a modern man because his sensibilities were very modern. Sometimes you wonder his sensibilities are almost like a Western person than a normal Indian person. With normal Indian, we move more by emotions, but in Western personal sensibility, there more on logic comes and the science comes in. He had a very scientific mind. You understand that cinema is a scientific art form. And he wrote science fictions. So even in the interviews, you find there's a very enlightened, sophisticated scientific mind behind all his arts. So this is Satyajit Ray. And I think that another thing I like very much of his is his humor. A very sense of healthy humor permeates throughout the script in the films. Remember the Charu watching the pedestrians with opera glass, so funny. And you remember this great guru, the Prasanna Mudi, and the Pandit who teaches opus, and you can imagine what kind of learning they would get. Aisha, Janasthan, Mudhabati. I mean, and excellently acted by one of the great Indian actor, Tulsi Chakraborty, brilliant sequence. So these humors, and even the raindrops, when it had to come, where it has dropped first, drop on the bald head of a man, and it gives such a humorous moments, and that those moments makes the films tolerable because Pather Pachal is a very sad story. So, but these humorous moments make them palatable. Another thing I think Ray taught us patriotism. Just remember this when the school inspector comes to the school of Parajitano, who chants and which country the meditations are so beautiful. Anyway, and we began this, the inspector smiles with pride, and we also become feel very proud. And we feel very proud when Gopi Gang Bhagavan went to the some alien king's palace and started singing Maharaja, salute you, we have come from Bangladesh. So just imagine, so we came from Bengal. So this is certain things, and through him you can feel the patriotism of proud for Bengal Ray, and it makes us Bengalis proud. And then I would say regarding his philosophy. Well, I think he's it's a kind of a philosophy of Upanishads, Choroi Gati, move on, life moves on. Just see the end of the three films of the trilogy, the Pather Pachali, the family finally moves on, and they're leaving their homestead, the Pite, they wanted so much to stay back. So the outskirt moves. And this, and then the Aparajito, after the mother's death, Opu moves alone again to the big world. And in Opur Shangshar, if you remember, the last image was Opu with the son, the next generation on her shoulder, proudly moving and beside the river and excellence. So move on, Chore Biti. That's the philosophy, I think, you say, in the core of Satyajit Ray's idea of life. And that makes him progressive man for all the time. Now, I'll just tell a few words about his practicing filmmakers, about his craftsmanship, I should must say, because it's easy to talk about theories, but when we come to the down to the practical filmmaking, what we learned from him. First, I should say, we learned a lot of sense of composition from him. Of course, it Stein started all these things, but he used this oblique of composition, the triangle compositions. What did we learn from all this? From Satyajit Ray, from a childhood. Remember the scene from Pathir Pachali. Triangle, its art form has dual role. It's a very dialectical image composition.
Yeah.
At the one time, say harmony, triangle, everything balanced, that's it. And also conflict. Triple point of interest, three characters. So see, Pathir Pachali, you see both. When the Opu first time, the son of the family goes to Pachala, the sister comes here and the mother's looking smiling. Beautiful composition, a triangle. And it looks so nice, such a harmonious composition that UNESCO in that year made it a poster and spread it out to the world as a happy family. That year it was a family year or something. So there is poverty, there is problem, but this is a happy family. And then the conflict situation, if you remember once, Durga stole some food and she and in the Thakurun were about enjoying the possibilities of some nice time. Then suddenly, third point, Shorbojoy comes in. And just a triangle. And very conflict situation. There is no dialogue is needed. Just look at the composition, you know. And this is the language of cinema. And this language of cinema were missing in India for decades.
Tanvi bhai, can I come back to you perhaps?
Yeah.
I know that Satyajit is such an open space, and for a filmmaker and critic like you, can I come back to you afterwards? Perhaps the philosophy you were talking, and then you were talking your inspirational side from Satyajit Ray. We can perhaps have it afterwards. Yeah, thank you.
Actually, Kaisar, I would rather prefer, I will take a few more minutes, then I have to be off because I have some dinner obligation, unfortunately. Yeah? So I will not take much time because it's so many things we have learned from him. I will go back to the end. I'll not go into details. Just see the music, soundtrack. Very, very rich soundtrack. And I won't say about the other sound, but just see the music part of it, which is so great. One of the things, effect music. It enhances the aesthetic quality of film in a great way. So if you see, remember that Pathir Pachali used very ingeniously used to show when Durga died, to show the pathos of the parents. Instead of any human voice, you use tar shanai, a kind of shanai which is played on string, and it's just a sharp noise it creates. And it brings the pathos of the father and mother so immensely. No human cry could have done that equally. And his theme music, all his theme music are excellent piece of work. Theme music is which is played at the beginning of the film, or title music, you sometimes call it. Think about the Ghore Baire, when that title music came, and with the burning fire in the background and the very somber tone. We understand that we are going to watch a very serious film, tragic film, and there is death involved in the film. And finally, that the Swadeshi movement chants this to do that time, Bande Mataram, Bande Mataram. So it gives you all the feel that what you are going to watch. So he's excellent, and the Pathir Pachali theme music, which is almost a household thing in Bengal now. Everybody knows that tune, and he used that a leitmotif in a lot of his other films, and in the other as part of the trilogy. Several times when the family thinks of their home, in the village, or dream of future, this theme music comes as a leitmotif, like the Western music. One instrument comes back again, one instrument. And when Aparajita, when Sarboja came back from Bihar to Bengal in the train, and suddenly, you know Bengal, when it comes after arid Bihar, you see the lush green and the water and the theme music of Pather Pachuli against comes that tune of the flute. And it gives such emotional impact to it. And so Ritik Ghatak, another emotional filmmaker, he said that it was like a atom bomb blast or something in his mind. I mean, he was so much moved by that just by the soundtrack. So Shukti Trace for we can go on talking about hours and hours. So anyway, we have time limit. So I will take leave from now. Thank you very much, guys, for inviting me. And I again express my all respect to the great filmmaker.
Many thanks, Tanvi Bhai, for this beautiful input. Just for our audiences, we're expecting film director Buddha Dashgupta to join at any things actually. And we have now, I would like to invite Sangeeta Dutta. And in the meantime, I would like to offer our profound condolences to especially the audiences who are in Indian subcontinent for the infection of COVID. Some of you perhaps lost your relatives, your loved ones. And this is quite painful that some of our speakers are also struggling with this situation. So please, this is also something that we'd like to share. Please let us know if we can be of your help by any means. We would like to win this struggle with the March jackpot. So please let us know. And audiences who left comment, we will come back to you perhaps afterwards. So our next speaker is Sangeeta Dutta, a writer, film and theatre director, singer working between India and the UK. She's the director of the arts company, Boythok UK, which promotes dialogue, debate, and new work from performing arts, literature, and film. In 2020, during the lockdown period, Boythok was the first South Asian platform to offer a 5-part digital concert series, Connect, in April. Boythok produced a music video. Those were the days of a Tagore, translation by Javed Akhtar, and featuring leading artists Shankar Mahadevan, Kaushika Chakraborty, Shoumik Dutta, Patricia Rosario, for fundraising for COVID safety and migrants support in India. She also curated the Connect Monsoon Edit in August. She is curating the presenting the conversation series My Life, My Art, which featured Shabana Azmi, Muzaffar Ali, Mira Ali, Sonali Bosch, and many others. So over to you, Sangeeta Dutta. Sangeeta Dutta is also a writer who wrote a biography on Shem Benegal, and also writing a biography in Upanishad. I will come back to, well, let me also, I'm sure Dr. Shumit Rai and Ashwin and Dev Sundaram will be our next speakers. Yeah. If you kindly unmute yourself, Sangeeta Di, if you kindly unmute yourself, thank you.
Hello.
You're still muted.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello, yeah.
Well, Namaskar, thank you very much. I think the expertise which has been displayed so beautifully. So my reflections are actually very humble reflections in the time I have, which I like to share. And these are, of course, subjective thoughts, but for what value they may have. Well, I see Satyajit Ray as a truly timeless global artist who poetically captured human emotions in a wide range of settings, crossing all cultural barriers. that is the core of my own feeling. And no doubt it will go on developing. And one can, I'll try to illustrate this mood through citing some of the films and some of the scenes, because such a wide range, impossible to do justice, but at least to evoke and provoke thought and emotion. And much has been said about that in terms of thoughts about the individual, society, and human experience. Now, may I perhaps cite some of the films which have already been cited by a number of the speakers. For example, in the trilogy, Pothe Panchali, it does depict very beautifully the rural scene, and the drudgery may be combined with the beauty very artistically. And intersect within that, the climax is actually stunning. When the father, who has been struggling, comes back after his rounds with money and finance to feed his family, and he discovers that he's unable to give the gift to his daughter because she is no more. And this is beauty conveyed when he simply looks up, and his wailing does not need any kind of language or translation. It penetrates one's human heart wherever one is. Similarly, we move on to Aparajito, where the father moves. This is a kind of migration which still goes on throughout the world, of course, in various parts of the world in different ways. And he moves to a religious city to improve his livelihood. But unfortunately, in due course, he's dragged by death. And that is beautifully conveyed through the flight of birds and the string of very painful sitar music, which leaves one completely stunned and moved beyond words. And then if you look, for example, at the third one, which is the Apur Sansar, where the young man is struggling again to educate himself, a very contemporary phenomenon or theme. And the support by his mother, who actually saves up money for him in her little earthen pot to support him, and the kind of loneliness and the kind of struggle when he works part-time, going to sleep over his books, and he's caught sleeping in the class. And then, of course, the mother-son relationship is very, very close. But again, sadness descends when he returns to his village to actually look around, and the loneliness is actually conveyed. There's no need for any deep language or dialogue. The loneliness and the emptiness comes through beautifully in the way he looks around, and she's no more. And as we move on, in the same kind of move on when he becomes an adult and he's looking forward and he wants to become a poet. And he struggles to go on, but he's full of talent. Unfortunately, his marriage is very shortly because his wife dies, and he more or less abandons his son. But again, the climax is totally penetrating when he looks around, very disconcerted. But his son comes running at him, his child, and he grabs him and he picks him up. The joy and the love is again beyond any kind of language. And Ray, of course, is not chronological, touch on so many different themes and so many points. A man was certainly full of magic. But if we look at something contrasting like disasters through famine in Ashanti Sankit, which is actually real, the Bengal famine, where food was being sent to Europe to feed the soldiers, where people were starving in Bengal, undivided Bengal. And you see the famine and the struggles and the turmoils, but intersect within that is the pain and the agony of the woman who sells her chastity for what? 4 bowls of rice. Similarly, if we look at some of the urban kind of challenges he takes on, he did say in an interview that he knew the urban scene probably better than many. And in Mahanagar, for example, we see the kind of struggle for jobs and employment, and the kind of the gender issue where woman is trying to, his wife, a man's wife is trying to find a job. And the man is in a way in a restlessness grips him, because despite his financial struggle, he turns to her and simply says, you better leave the job. And then that again is in a sort of verbal and gestures communicate in a penetrating manner the kind of move. Similarly, in the related themes on Company Limited and another of his films, in Company Limited, we see ambition and power driving a man despite his inner doubts and anxieties towards wanting to rise up in a kind of multinational world, which is still a very contemporary kind of phenomenon, you know, with people wanting to reach the top. And that again is captured through silences, dialogue, and looks, which I know many people have understood without knowing anything about the Bengali culture or Indian culture. And if we look at the celebrity culture again, which is again within an urban perhaps framework, that the Nayak, the film, where you see the kind of, the man is plagued and he has sleepless nights. And in fact, he's semi-suicidal, but the drive to glamour and the celebrity worship is such by his audience that he's driven towards that direction. But we do not know what mood he'll finally end up in. Ray, of course, moved on to various themes, and I can just touch, time is short. He touched in various ways, very subtle manner, with the colonial challenges at various points in various films. For example, in Charulata, which we can look at in various ways, we see the struggle of this newspaper editor who is really writing against British injustices in various ways, and he's totally devoted to his work. In fact, he's so devoted, he perhaps neglects his wife. And herein enters a triangular relationship of interaction between the man, his wife, and his brother. And we have the kind of love triangle, which has its own kinds of tensions, and it unfolds the kind of story of humanity and the kind of colonial kind of picture, which is a backdrop. But again, Ray touches on so many nuances and leaves you thinking and reflecting on the past and the present and human character. And similarly, we look at the chess players. We haven't, somebody mentioned, the chess players are beautiful. In a way, it's a kind of colonial tragedy combined with humor, where you have two crazy chess players who play inside outside, while in the backdrop, the British are gently marching in, and under a very sort of warm pretext, they take over a part of India in the northern part. And they, of course, are totally obsessed with their chess playing. So there's enormous amount of kind of very subtle, dry humor buried in that kind of backdrop. And similarly, in a very, it's very sad, but it's also kind of very artistic, depends how you look at it. In a music room, we see the collapse of feudalism. But the man is more or less broke, the feudal lord, but he's so attached to his music that he's desperate and he hangs on to his music room, despite the background, the music room, and his inability to finance that, although his sort of hold is collapsing. And Ray, of course, touched on very sensitive themes, which one should mention, that he touched on the whole nature of blind faith, which has contemporary resonance in many ways. For example, in The Enemy of the People, we see very beautifully the kind of faith which people have. A group that, despite scientific proof of water from a shrine being polluted and being bad for health, they go against that. And this turns into a political struggle at a political level. But ultimately, the poor doctor who's trying to convince the local population that they will become ill, and they are so prejudged and blind. But until there is hope that sense will come through. And similarly, in a very profound film, I may be extremely complex, which shows the obsession of the father-in-law with his daughter-in-law, who sees the daughter-in-law in the reincarnation of a goddess. And ultimately, the ending is so tragic because she ends up going into the river and immersing herself, like many in the end of a religious festival, which is done with a lot of our gods. So that is a kind of tragedy combined with a kind of human frailty and obsession, which he brings out beautifully. So all in all, my feeling is very simply that Ray was it was magic. His way in which he combined and weaved images, sound, silences, and he hit you in between the eyes, and culture became almost irrelevant. I could just conclude in the words of the great Japanese film director, Akira Kurosawa, and I note he said, I quote,
It's
not
7
to
now.
not to have seen, not to have seen the cinema of Ray seems existing in the world without seeing the sun or the moon. Now, what profound accolade can you have more than that from Kurosawa? And that makes one reflect that Ray is a character, is a subject. We can make critical debates on the small points. Of course, he would himself welcome all those today if he was around. But I believe that all the kind of enormous prizes, international Oscar, which was awarded to him, really do not touch the genius of the man and the magic. And I think he is certainly a timeless figure which we should always embrace. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Dr. Shumit Rai. So Dr. Shumit Rai is a writer, academic, and broadcaster. He is Fellow School of International Relations and Strategic Studies, Yadavpur University, Kolkata. He has been researching on soft power and Indian cinema. He has also completed writing fiction stories and novels, and also attached to many universities, and that include LSE, SUAS, City University of London, etc. So our next speaker is Sangeeta Dutta, and we also have the senior professor, senior lecturer of world cinema of Queen Mary University of London, Ashwin Devasundaram afterwards. And just now, Budhev Dasgupta also joining in a few minutes. So over to you, Sangeeta Dutta.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah. Thank you very much for setting up this very interesting symposium. It's been a pleasure listening to the previous speakers, an absolute pleasure to listen to Adoor after a very long time. And I look forward to listening to Budhev and Ashwin following me. This has been a long session, and I think a lot of discussion has already happened on Ray's work, on his filmography. I'm wondering what new light I would be able to throw on the subject here. So I'm going to make this a little personal and perhaps try and trace a journey with my responses and my exposure to Ray. As many children in Bengal, I think I would remember my first film, which I saw of Satyajit Ray, as Gopika in Bagabain. So we were children, we watched a film which we had already heard as stories from our parents and our grandparents, and Ray himself was putting on celluloid a story that his grandfather, a great writer of children's literature, had written many years ago. So Gopika in Bagabain, a story that came to us through oral history, then through our reading of children's books, and then to Satyajit Ray bringing it to cinema. I think that's probably my first, earliest memory of a Ray film. But, you know, we grew up in those times, and we were so fortunate to grow up with Ray's films coming releasing almost every year. As somebody said, he was compelled to make films pretty at a regular basis because he had a unit to support and he didn't want them to disband, and he had to move from project to project. So it's amazing that we're actually looking at a whole body of 37 films, features, shorts, documentaries. So to come back to Gopiga and Bhagavan, as I said, it was a film that we saw like a magic story about two village simpletons who are then given a boon by the king of ghosts. And then they go on these fantastic adventures. But at the end of it, these two very simple village guys can actually stop a war. So they are anti-war, and they actually work with the king who is anti-war and anti-violence. So there are actually larger global political truths and tussles that are coming and messages that come through that story. And that's very interesting that the next generation, when my son watches the film and when he's listening to the story from me and then watching the film, to him, the first thing is that Gopiga and Bhagavan is about magic, but it's also about peace. It's also anti-war. It's got these fantastic, it's about soldiers who are hired, mercenary soldiers who are not given food. So there are, very contemporary images and ideas to which you can connect with, even in a magic fairy tale story like Gopiga and Bhagavan. As we grew into our teenage, I think we started watching the Apu trilogy, and the magic of the Apu trilogy, as many people here have already said, is about discovering new things and new emotions and new responses which the filmmaker draws from you as you see it at various stages of your life. So the first time you see Pather Pachali, you're crying your heart out for Durga, and probably the next time you're noticing the focus in your head also shifts to the little boy who is growing up. The focus shifts to the mother, who's such a fantastic character, who Satyajit Ray actually spent so much time writing out, because when you read the story, there are so many other things happening. This primary relationship between the mother and the son is something that Ray himself focused on. And that's fantastic about his adaptations of literature. I'm fascinated by Ray's adaptations of literature, how he turns into a script the story, and how the focus on certain characters who are important to him stay in the story, certain others become quite peripheral, and how, as he said in his own interviews very often, that as he was writing Pather Pachali and he was writing Aparajito, he had huge empathy for the mother's character, the single woman who faces poverty, who faces dislocation, they have to move away from the village, and then she raises her son with whatever little means she can and sends the boy to Calcutta. And there is that train sound that she hears at night, always hoping that this next train is probably going to bring her son back to her. So it's these sort of things which you start thinking about, and you realize when you have an author like Ray, how he's shaping his own narrative, what cinematic space he's giving to characters, what is the mise-en-scene he creates, and how nature begins to play such a big important part, both in Aparajito as well, of course, in Upur Sangshar, the rain, the storm, the human tragedy that follows, the disintegration of the family, leaving the ancestral home and moving away to a new land. Now, who doesn't recognize that? And through this whole year, 2020 to 21, what have we been talking about? We've been talking about migration. And that's in the world today, the biggest problem, the biggest human issue focus that we all have. When you look at Pather Pachali today, perhaps that's the focus that a child would pick up or a younger audience would pick up. So that's what's fascinating about when we are watching what we drew out of it. When I'm teaching Ray in St. Xavier's College in Bombay or later at Birkbeck in London, what am I giving to these students? What sort of thoughts and what are they getting out of the texts? This is how a classic is determined. not that we keep saying the same thing over and over again, not what Satish Bahadur ji spoke to us when we went to Pune or he came to Xavier's, or what I am teaching to my son or to my students. It's quite the idea that a classic will elicit response from different generations and from different people in fascinatingly different ways. That's what I find wonderful. I would love to talk more about that, but given the sort of restrictions in time, I'd very quickly like to move to two other areas. One, my memory of meeting Satyajit Ray himself. We were in university at Jadavpur University when he was given his, his MPhil, his doctorate, his honorary doctorate. So he was there when we were getting our graduation, and it was an absolute honor. I mean, I think we were all getting goosebumps going up to him and talking to him, but he was very approachable, very friendly, spoke very little, but he was friendly. And there were two other sessions with discussions which we had with him, one on music, one on literary adaptations. And those are things which are going to stay with me forever, because they were rare. They were also about not just the content that the person was giving you, but the personality standing in front of you, speaking in such clear diction, in such great articulation, how clear his thoughts were. As someone said before, the film was something that he carried in his head. And when you saw his scripts, they were quite often the storyboarding and little notes. That's how he had actually started. Even Madhavi Dee, in a very recent interview, has said that he would have these doodles and drawings and little notes, and then on the floor there would be a reading, and that's it. That's how the actor would understand what exactly was expected of him or her. So to quickly move to just two other things which strike me over and over again about how contemporary Satyajit Ray is. The idea that, there's been this long historical debate about who the political filmmakers were and who weren't, and Mrinal Sen and Ritik Ghatak were more political and Ray was apolitical. I think there's many reasons for which we need to revisit that idea, because the City trilogy, which some of you have already spoken about, tell us so much about the changing landscape of the city of Kolkata. And so that boy who moved from his ancestral home to Benares and then came to study the Apu story really reflected the transition and the migration history of that time. But by the time you're coming into the 70s and the post-Naxal movement time, the way things were changing, the way the pristine Bengali identity was changing, how there were characters who were from other communities, the traders, the businessmen, the middleman, these were the people all coming in, making a great change in our values. And so you find those city stories really questioning the morality of a certain way of thinking and a certain way of life. I find that absolutely fascinating. And a lot of that gets carried on, of course, to Ganashotru and more sort of modern debates. Nobody's talked about Shaka Proshaka. Again, a very important film where somebody who is constantly the silent person, but who's also constantly bringing up the moral questions for us. Women do that a lot in many of his characters, in many of his films. And of course, the women's subject was something as I grew up and I was doing my PhD and writing on women's issues, looking at, we grew up during the feminist movement. So then Charulata and Mahanagar and the women that he empathizes with and writes so subjectively about, they raise other questions about the society and patriarchy and the norms within which they were constricted at a certain time. So there's so much to say. I hope I can come back again later and talk. But finally, I think as a musician myself, I do want to say a few words about Ray's use of music and theme sounds, theme tunes. We've talked about that. Again, growing up years, adolescence, Peluda, Shonar Kerala. You see an entire generation now for whom that theme tune from Sonar Killa or the Golden Fortress resonates in an absolutely wonderful way. Just earlier this evening, there was a group of musicians saying that if these are tunes that you don't respond to, then you're not a Bengali. Then the sense of the Bengal sensibility comes so much from Satyajit Ray's ideas of music. And they were so sound because he played the piano, he knew his Western music, he knew how to actually use certain Western techniques that he brought into the Bengali or the Indian music, and his earlier associations with Ravi Shankar and Ali Akbar Khan, the music in Jalsa Ghar, one of the most important films that we've ever seen on classical music and dance is Jalsa Ghar, the music room. So yes, there are so many areas and so many angles and so many things to say. But finally, I think my work with Rituparna Ghosh, I've worked as associate director with him on many films, and our adaptations of Tagore again, so Chokher Bali, and then Noka Dubi. And of course, I think a film like Utshab, which directly is inspired by Shaka Prashaka and draws on it. Ritu himself was constantly referred to as the inheritor of Ray's legacy. And there was so much of Ray in his thinking and in his creation of mise-en-scene, the treatment of characters. So seeing firsthand somebody who's directly the upholder or the extender of Ray's legacy, that was also a great learning lesson. And when I made my film Life Goes On, I think there were many tributes to Ray. I worked with Sharmila Tagore. The story was written for Sharmila Tagore and Soumitra Chatterjee. So there were actually many references to Opu Shangshar. Even that little scene where she writes on a cigarette that you've promised to have only one a day. There were these little intertextual references that I had in my film about that relationship between a husband and a wife. I think just, picking up on Ray and these later adaptations, Apurnadi's Ghore Baire, Srijit, who's looked at Nayok in his own film. So I think this is the test. This is the test of a classic and of an auteur again, that an entire culture and an entire generation then starts looking at a text and brings something more to it with new work. I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much for asking me. I can't hear you. Can't hear.
Many thanks for this profound input. You covered many issues, many things. We have Buddhadev Dasgupta just joined as part of this Congress. Warm welcome, Buddhadev Da. Can you hear me? Well, you can perhaps, but if you kindly unmute yourself. You're muted at this moment. So we will have a brief input from Buddhadev Dasgupta. And as you know, we have a scholar of Indian cinema, a senior lecturer of Queen Mary University, Ashwin Devasundaram. Saudha is truly honored to have you and your support as part of this Congress. Buddhadev, you kindly have to unmute yourself. Buddhadev, can you hear me? You are muted at this moment. So if you kindly unmute. And in the meantime, Shangitadi, many thanks. I know you love and admiration for Satyajit Ray and the works you've been doing, connecting Satyajit Ray. Perhaps a few years ago in South Bank, Shomik was doing a session that reinterprets Satyajit's music, Satyajit Ray's music. I couldn't attend, but it was so, while he was reading the description, it was so interesting.
Yeah, that's a project called King of Ghosts, Bhute Raja translating as
exactly,
King of Ghosts. So it was inspired by Gupi Gain Bhagavan. And it's a project that has toured and traveled around the world. We're still trying to bring it to India, but it's been everywhere else.
Right. Congratulations to Shami for this great work. And Buddha, if you kindly unmute, otherwise I have to go back to Ashwin. Buddha, can you hear me? You can perhaps, but unfortunately you are muted. Is Shohinidhi around you? He can perhaps, she can perhaps help. You are muted, so let me see whether this became the part of new normality. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Not a single line.
Buddha, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Good.
So, this is an honor. This is an honor to have one of the leading interpreters of Indian cinema at this moment, Buddhadev Dasgupta, is part of this Congress. So many thanks, Buddhadev, for joining. And if you kindly share your own take on Satyajit Ray now.
Definitely. Look, I made Choti Rai when I was a student. And I was introduced to Choti Rai, but before that, by my father. He decided to all my brothers to Potter Patil. And I did Potter Patil much before that, but seeing the film and interpreting the film literature and interpreting literature to cinema was something so unique that I thought I must meet this man. Well, at that time, and I never thought of becoming a filmmaker. I just thought I must meet this person. So I went to Choti Rai's place one day. I met Soumitra Chatterjee was there. Ashur, the poet, forgetting his name. It's a unique experience, you know. I have found only two persons who used to talk to Shruti Rai as Tumi. You know, in Bengali, Tumi is said only to a person who is junior to him. There's a Shamushin, yes, Shamushin, and then later Kamal Kumar Majumdar. Shamushin, he came and Shruti Rai immediately got little he said, Kamal Samunda, আপনি সব কি লিখছেন আপনার কাগজে? At that time, Shamushin was editing one magazine. I'm just forgetting the name, you know. And Shamushin said, well, Manik will make bad films. If you write bad, upset, that cannot happen. That should not happen. And again, I found Kamal Majumdar. We had together to go to Kamal Das theatre show at theatre, and then he said, Kamala, please come, we'll go together. And Kamala said, no, you go, I'll come with them. তুমি যাও, আমি ওদের সঙ্গে যাব. These are the only two persons about talking to me to Shruti Rai. And I think that both these persons had definitely increased raised philosophy of life and contributed to raise knowledge of literature and poetry, definitely. After some time, at that time I have started reading economics, honors in economics, and I knew that Shruti Rai also a student of economics. So I thought I must go and meet him. Slowly, without my realization, my relation, I realized that I'm also getting what should I say? Getting acquainted with this person, Shruti Rai, who is also a person who has read economics and who has also studied literature in such a way that by that time I've become a fan of his stories, his special stories. And even now we are a fan of his literature. Even today, Shoini and myself, we started reading one of his short stories. But I think that Shruti Rai, while he was a great filmmaker, definitely. He was also a great storyteller. And at that time, our association started growing thicker. I started realizing that this is a man I must come to meet whenever he can give me time. And he was also very curious to know about me because he came to know that I'm also interested in music, in economics, and from economics, I've also started realizing how to take the socio-economic things, socio-cultural things to my knowledge of literature and other things. At that point of time, unknowingly, I took Ray as my master, and I decided one day to go to him and ask him whether I can be his assistant as a filmmaker. I went one day and requested him, "Can I be your assistant?" He said, "No, can't." You can't. And I was very upset, very upset. Long after that, I realized why didn't he took me at that time, and why did he say no? Now I realize it's good they didn't accept me as his assistant. It's good that I've never acted, never worked with him. Had I been working with him as an assistant filmmaker, I would not been realized his technique of filmmaking, and also I would have not realized his greatness in filmmaking. Sometime back, well, Shunya and myself were watching Shamapti, and it's such a unique film. It was made such a long time back, and such a unique film. I think that from that point of time, I realized that cinema is something that I should learn myself. And slowly that started happening in my life. I started realizing that cinema is something which I should learn as by myself. I should learn cinema without being assisting anyone. Our what should I say? I should not say friendship. Today I should say relationship. Or my relation with Saudha started growing thicker, and It was that time I was also studying economics and completed the course and just made my first film, Durat. And he was so happy seeing that film, watching that film. He was so happy that I remember I was sitting just back to Ray's seat, and Ray was watching the film, and I was watching Ray and his movements. And after the film was over, I came out and just started walking in Delhi. It was in Delhi, in Panorama. And I went back to the hotel after some time, and one of my friends told me he didn't attend his press conference. He just talked about your film, Durattu. Again, after that, I took him to see my third film, Gyojiddu. Gyojiddu. He was also got fascinated with that film, and we met again. He was in the jury, and I was as a film, the competition. But I'm not a person who like to visit someone's place, likes to talk to someone. I wanted to be I wanted to be with myself. From that time onward, I realized how this watching myself, how this staying with myself is important for my work. And saw the film in Venice, and was very happy seeing the film in the big screen. And he expected that this film definitely will get an award, but didn't get the main award. That just got a press award. After a long time, my film Uttara was again in Venice and got the Best Director award. But by that time, they was not with us. He left this world. I think such a filmmaker who will always be a master to any young filmmaker. I always think that young filmmakers should go on watching his films again and again. And I still think that he is a great master of Indian cinema. And at the same time, I also think the Ghatak, Minalsan, and all others definitely are great filmmakers. But I'll always suggest filmmakers all over the world to watch Ray again and again. You know, by watching Ray, I think Ray can be your master. Just watching Ray. By watching Ray, you can be a filmmaker. Don't have to need anything. Don't need anything. Just
Wow.
watching film can be a student of cinema, and you can fall in love with cinema. That's exactly what happened to me in my life. Thank you. I think it's okay.
Thank you.
Uh,
Many thanks, Buddha. Many thanks, first of all, for joining. And secondly, for sharing this precious input in this Congress. Saudha Society of Poetry in Indian Music is truly honored to have you participate, for your participation, first of all.
My pleasure.
For your profound input. Thank you, Buddha. I also wanted to introduce Ashwin with you. Ashwin is the senior lecturer at Queen Mary University. He's also an expert, a scholar of world cinema. So specialized in world cinema, particularly new independent Indian cinema, emerging cinemas from South Asia, the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa. Ashwin's research interests are open to transdisciplinary and intercultural exploration. He's also interested in intersection of cinematic representations with topical themes and alternative discourses, particularly through the prism of philosophy, politics, drama, visual art, post-colonialism, postmodernism, migration, LGBTQ issues, marginalized and minority narratives, subalternity. Many thanks, and is also a well-known author of world cinema. Many thanks. One of his books, India's New Independent Cinema, Rise of Hybrid, and forthcoming edited volume, Indian Cinema Beyond Bollywood, the New Independent Cinema Evolution. Very interesting work, Ashwin. Look forward to reading this. And I managed to read your input on your one of the articles from Bergman. So thank you very much for joining, and many thanks for your support in relation to promoting this Congress, Satyajit Congress. Over to you.
Thanks, thanks also to Saudha Arts for inviting me to contribute to this momentous celebration of Satyajit Ray's birth centenary. My fellow speakers have provided such erudite and insightful perspectives. So I'm going to do my best to speak to some of those perspectives and maybe hyperlink to some of the themes that have been mentioned. I'd like to touch upon 3 points in this brief presentation. The first is Ray's cinematic kinship with his fellow global film auteurs, the Swedish director Ingmar Bergman and eminent Sri Lankan filmmaker Lester James Peary's. Second, Ray's commitment to foregrounding strong on-screen roles for women. And third, Ray's clairvoyance, his almost prophetic interpretation of political, religious, and social Indian sensibilities and spirit of the times. Satyajit Ray was probably the most significant Indian artist to positively acknowledge Bergman's singular style. Apart from their cinematic commonality as global art house filmmaking luminaries, Ray's encounter with a number of Bergman films during a sojourn in London galvanized him to promote Bergman's work through the Indian Film Society movement in the early 1970s. In one of several interviews, Ray expresses an appreciation for the Swedish director's portfolio of work, and he says, it's Bergman who I continue to be fascinated by. I think he's remarkable. I envy his stock company because given actors like that, one could do extraordinary things. On my first visit to Stockholm, I was particularly keen to meet Bergman as I had been a great admirer of his work ever since I saw The Seventh Seal way back in the mid-50s. Demonstrating that this fascination was certainly not unidirectional, Ray reveals that he had been using the bounced light technique with his cinematographer Subrato Mitra before Bergman and Sven Nykvist showcased their own kind of masterful deployment of this diffused lighting strategy in several films. So Ray states, about 7 or 8 years before Pather Panchali was made, I read an article in American Cinematographer written by Sven Nykvist at the time of Bergman's Through a Glass Darkly, I think claiming the invention of bounced light, but we, meaning Ray and Mitra, had been using it since 1954. So my focus here is not on establishing either Ray's or Bergman's primacy in practicing the bounced light method. Rather, the two filmmakers' shared deployment of this technique reveals that they were thinking along similar operative cinematic lines, drawing on formal and stylistic elements from a larger filmic grammar and applying these strategies to their specific local Indian and Swedish contexts. Bergman was an admirer of Ray's filmic work and was deeply moved after seeing the film Devi in Sweden. Bergman's appreciation of Ray's filmmaking lends credence to the assertion that there existed significant mutual respect and admiration between the Swedish and Indian auteurs. Ray also shared a long-standing friendship with pioneering Sri Lankan director Lester James Peary's, whose first film, Rekava, had been placed alongside Ray's Pather Panchali. The two filmmakers corresponded via letters in 1957 and never met till 1968. So these letters now reside in the BFI archive. And Peary says about Ray, he's the greatest humanist cinema has ever known. He is a tapestry of Indian life so vast, there is nobody to equal him. In his introspection, Satyajit Ray says, I'm not interested only in my own times. So the resonance of Ray's film themes with the contemporary Indian zeitgeist, the state of the nation, speaks volumes about Ray's cinematic clairvoyance and powers of prefiguration. Gore Baire, The Home and the World, is prescient in its portrayal of Hindu-Muslim discord and the rise of majoritarian and fundamentalist Hindu ideology that mirrors the current state of play in BJP-ruled India today. Rabindranath Tagore's novel Gora, published in 1910, is an apt companion piece to Gore Baire's visualization of the Swadeshi anti-colonial movement and is a revealing Rosetta Stone to decoding the ideological and philosophical subtext in Ray's film. Tagore's Gora challenges the idea of India as being fashioned in the crucible of Orthodox Hinduism. And as Tanya Sarkar notes in the essay, Rabindranath's Gora and the Intractable Problem of Indian Patriotism, Gora rejects the attempt to collapse, and here I quote, the land and people of India into the image of a freshly coined goddess of the motherland, end quote. In the film, Nikhilesh, who's played by Victor Banerjee, articulates a similar rejection. Gore Baire's deployment of the Swadeshi's rallying cry, Vande Mataram, hail to the motherland, is particularly relevant in this context, considering the slogan's appropriation and transmogrification into a signifier and a shibboleth of violent and divisive hyper-nationalism in contemporary India. The other significant facet of Ray's corpus is his commitment to espousing emancipatory narratives of agency-bearing central female characters. So, for example, Bimola in Gore Baire is a case in point. Devi, Teen Kanya, and Charulata are a handful of examples of Ray's films that feature strong women. Charulata is an essential filmic companion piece to Gore Baire, and In these films can a commonality of cloistered female protagonists who are irrepressible in their desire to break through the strictures that are imposed on them by a wider patriarchal milieu. Also worth mentioning the late great actor Soumitra Chatterjee, who reprises the role of the provocateur and the disruptor of domestic equilibrium in both the films. I'd also like to touch upon Ray's inimitable form and style. Ray's distinctive use of lighting and cinematography to delineate interior and exterior space. It punctuates the visual aesthetic of several of his films. Ray's collaboration with Subroto Mitra in the mood poem Jal Saga, The Music Room, is a masterclass in expressionistic angles, chiaroscuro lighting, and experiments with time and space. Strategic use of close-up shots of the female face is another filmic trademark Ray shares with Bergman. One of the evocative moments in Gore Baire is the sequence where Bimola secretly watches Sandeep's rousing speech. Lateral lines of light and shadow splayed across her face seem to mimic the film's dialectic of confinement and liberation, the home and the world. In Godushatru, Ray's adaptation of Henrik Ibsen's An Enemy of the People, an idealistic small-town doctor's scientific research reveals that contaminated, bacteria-ridden holy water disseminated at the local temple is causing a fatal epidemic of jaundice. When the doctor tries to warn the town's citizens about the danger, he faces a violent backlash from the ultra-religious municipal authorities, corrupt local press, and baying vigilante mobs. The parallel between Ray's depiction of the silencing of rational and critical voices by fundamentalist forces, dictatorial demagogues, and political authoritarianism is an uncanny reminder of the state of play in India today. It is possible to wonder what Satyajit Ray would have made of the theater of tragedy unfolding as we speak, as India is ravaged by an all too real pandemic, and the nation's prime minister plays Pied Piper at election rallies as countless COVID-19 crematoriums and funeral pyres burn, wreaking untold devastation and death across the land. I'll end there.
Thank you. Many thanks for this beautiful input again. And like I mentioned to you before, so the Society of Poetry and Indian Music is truly honored for the collaboration you made for this Congress, Ashwin. Immense gratitude for your help, for your support, and also for this profound contribution to this Congress. We are approaching to the end now for today, and as you know, this is a two-day International Satyajit Congress, and the second day will feature again some leading directors and academics, and that will start from 3 p.m. UK time and 7:30 Indian time, 8 p.m. Bangladesh time. And those who are quite new to Saudha, this is a leading Indian classical music promoting organizations that began its revolutionary journey to promote global music, global art forms, predominantly South Asian art forms, with a view to revolutionize the listening and watching experience of the audiences. So during 10 years, Saudha has managed to fuse and develop new interpretation of different art forms through fusion, through meaningful fusion with Indian art form with global art forms. So many thanks to those who have been supporting Saudha from the day one. We started like I mentioned, 10 years ago, with one of the finest Indian classical vocalists here in the UK, Mr. Chandra Chakraborty. And then we have done many critically acclaimed art initiatives in the major art venues of the UK. And we look forward for actually the live events. That is something we are looking forward to. And then definitely we will start, we'll begin to connect to you after this COVID is over. So the plan is still in the box. Perhaps by the end of this year, we will start our live events. So, ladies and gentlemen who have watched this live streaming and who shared this with your friends, gratitude to all of you, and gratitude to all of our speakers. Dr. Shumit Rai, many thanks for joining, and many thanks for your wonderful input. I can see perhaps Sangeeta Datta is still here. Ashwin, Dr. Ashwin, Devasundaram, many thanks again. And many thanks to all of our speakers, Bhaskar, Dr. Podai, Adoor Gopalakrishnan ji, who joined the early phase, and then Tabassum, Rukhsana Tabassum, Gulrukh Khan. Many thanks again, and gratitude to all of our audiences again. See you tomorrow at 3 p.m. UK time. Thank you. Thank you, Ashwin.